They mocked her, smiled with smug contempt, rolled their eyes when she passed, whispered behind hands that never offered to help. In the towering heart of Chicago's financial district, where polished marble reflected the sharp glint of ambition, Clara Jennings was just a fixture, a shadow, a necessary inconvenience they all expected to vanish before meetings began and reappear after they were done, never to speak, never to matter. She was the cleaning lady, the one in the green uniform, the woman no one saw. But one day she stood at the head of the boardroom table and did the unthinkable. She fired the CEO, and no one saw it coming. For 17 years, Clara walked those same halls. Not out of desperation, not because she lacked options, but because she believed in quiet resilience, and because she was watching, listening, waiting. Her cart squeaked just enough to warn people she was near, yet not enough for them to care. Every smirk, every offhand comment, every paper tossed toward a bin but never in. It built something inside her. Not rage, not revenge. Something deeper. A resolve forged in silence. Delacroix Holdings was a glass fortress. 20 stories of elegance, opulence, and ego. The building had been featured in architectural magazines, praised for its transparent design and bold corporate philosophy. But those who cleaned its floors knew. There was nothing transparent about the way things worked inside. The company's culture was a hierarchy etched in stone. Executives dined in rooftop lounges, while custodial staff took their breaks in a windowless room beneath the loading dock. First names were currency. Clara had none. Promotions came to those who knew the right people or said the right things at the right parties. And above it all sat Leonard Bishop, CEO, self-styled visionary, ruthless tactician. His laugh was always a little too loud, his compliments always tinged with condescension. To him, Clara was a name not even worth forgetting. One rainy Tuesday morning, Clara was wiping down the glass wall outside Conference Room E when she heard them. Two directors, standing inches away, voices lowered just enough to imply confidence, but not caution. "She's been here since what, 2005?" one asked, sipping his coffee. "Is there no retirement age for janitors?" The other laughed. "She's just part of the scenery. Doesn't even notice we're talking." Clara paused, but she didn't look at them. She just adjusted her grip on the cloth and kept wiping. They didn't know she remembered everything. But the worst came minutes later. Inside the conference room, another conversation had begun. This one less flippant, more calculated. "We need to clean house," one of the senior VPs was saying. "/15%. Facilities, admin, low-value departments. No one notices when we cut from the bottom." Someone chuckled. "Half of them should have been gone years ago. They think they matter. They don't." Clara stood frozen for a moment, her hand resting on the handle of her cart, the weight of every unswept assumption pressing against her chest. She looked down at her shoes. Worn. Polished the night before, like always. Then she looked through the glass, her own reflection faint, almost invisible. That's how they saw her. Invisible. Replaceable. Powerless. They didn't know who she really was. They didn't know the will behind the eyes that looked down when they mocked her. They didn't know that the woman who wiped their whiteboards clean and emptied their trash cans had a secret. Clara Jennings was not just a cleaning lady. She was the majority shareholder of Delacroix Holdings. It wasn't a title she wore. It wasn't a privilege she flaunted. It was a legacy, one born from her husband Martin, who had believed in the company before it became the glossy giant it now was. Martin had invested early, not for profit, but for people. He saw potential in ideas, in others. And when he died, Clara had inherited everything. At first, she didn't know what to do with it. She was a widow, not a businesswoman. She had buried the love of her life and buried herself in a job that made her feel close to him, where his vision had once taken root. She worked through grief the only way she knew how. By showing up, doing what others overlooked, and surviving day by day. But she never sold her shares. She never stopped watching. And now, after nearly 2 decades of silence, she understood something vital. The culture at Delacroix wasn't broken because of one bad executive or a few cruel jokes. It was broken because people stopped caring about the ground they stood on. They stopped seeing the people who kept it clean, kept it running, kept it human. Clara had always been underestimated, and that was her advantage. They never saw her coming. But she was coming. And this time, she wouldn't be holding a mop. She'd be holding the floor. And she wouldn't be cleaning the boardroom. She would be clearing it out. The night Clara Jennings discovered just how much power she held, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt overwhelmed. The envelope had arrived 6 weeks after Martin's funeral. It was thick, unassuming, marked confidential, in gold-embossed lettering from a firm she vaguely recognized. She had opened it while still wearing her apron, the soft echo of the evening news murmuring in the background. Inside were transfer documents, legal confirmations, and a letter from Martin's lawyer explaining that she now held 47% of Delacroix Holdings' equity. She had sat motionless at the kitchen table for over an hour, her eyes locked on numbers she didn't understand and phrases that sounded like they belonged in another world. Proxy voting rights, controlling stake, board-level authority. She hadn't asked for any of it. Martin had believed in the company when it was little more than a vision and a handful of stressed-out engineers. He had poured his savings, time, and belief into Delacroix long before skyscrapers and IPOs. They used to joke about it over dinner, how one day the company might make it big and they'd travel the world. But then Martin got sick, and Delacroix took off without him. Clara had grieved the way quiet people do. She folded herself into smaller spaces, into tasks, into motion. She declined the board's invitation to join their quarterly meetings, signed over temporary voting rights to an executive she barely remembered, and returned to the only world she understood, the janitorial schedule she had mastered for over a decade. But grief softens into reflection. And reflection, in Clara's case, turned into observation. The company Martin had believed in, his dream, had grown into something else. Something cold. Ruthless. Detached. He would have hated what it became. The people at the bottom were expendable. Facilities staff worked long shifts without recognition. HR buried complaints. Middle managers micromanaged with impunity while executives siphoned bonuses like lifelines. And through it all, Clara remained invisible. But now she knew she wasn't powerless. She was the company's future. Clara didn't tell anyone. She wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, she moved through Delacroix's glittering halls like a ghost with a secret. Every time someone sneered or walked past without looking at her, they unknowingly handed her more resolve. Every joke about her being ancient or just background noise added a brick to the quiet fortress she was building inside. She began to see her invisibility not as a burden, but as armor. No one paid attention when she entered rooms. No one stopped her when she stood near printers while executives whispered about restructuring. No one cared when she emptied wastebaskets filled with confidential drafts. They left spreadsheets open. They left personnel memos unattended. They forgot she was there. But Clara was always watching. She noticed when Janice and payroll started coming in late and leaving with tears in her eyes. She noticed when the new intern stopped smiling after being sent to Bishop's office twice in 1 week. She noticed when the diversity committee meetings vanished from the calendar altogether. And most of all, she noticed when the layoffs started hitting the people who didn't play the game. It became clear to her that Delacroix wasn't just broken, it was corrupt. And she was done being silent. One Thursday evening, long after the rest of the building had cleared out, Clara sat down at her kitchen table and opened a blank notebook. She didn't type, she wrote by hand, slowly, carefully. At the top, she wrote 3 words in block letters. The Jennings Report. She began by listing every unethical action she had seen or overheard. She dated them, cross-referenced them. She described the culture of intimidation, the fabricated write-ups, the silence around harassment. Names were recorded. Quotes were remembered word for word. She wasn't embellishing. She didn't need to. She had been collecting receipts for years. She just hadn't known she'd use them. When the notebook was filled, she made 3 phone calls. The first was to her niece Camille, a forensic accountant with a mind like a scalpel. Camille offered to help audit discrepancies in financial records, unpaid bonuses, and misuse of travel expenses. The second was to Henry, a retired attorney who had once represented a whistleblower buried by corporate litigation. He offered his services pro bono, calling Clara's cause the kind of case that restores your faith in justice. The third was to Evelyn, a former HR manager who had been pushed out 5 years earlier after raising concerns about the CEO's disciplinary methods. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She said, "Whatever you need, I'm in." Clara met them all in person. No email trails, no digital documents, just meetings in quiet corners of diners and back rooms of libraries. Over the next few weeks, they combed through records, reconstructed timelines, and prepared testimonies. The Jennings report grew. From a handwritten notebook to a legal dossier. It now included notarized statements, contract breaches, compensation disparities, and internal memos that contradicted public reports. But even as she built her case, Clara didn't stop cleaning. Every morning she still pushed her cart through the lobby with practiced precision, still scrubbed the floor beneath the portraits of former CEOs, still nodded silently at people who never bothered to ask about her name. She wasn't doing it out of humility anymore. She was doing it because she was measuring something. Who looked her in the eye? Who said, "Thank you"? Who didn't? She was building a mental map, not just of wrongdoing, but of potential. Of who could help rebuild once the old structure collapsed. Because Clara wasn't just preparing for a reckoning. She was preparing for what came after. She wasn't planning to burn Delacroix down. She was planning to reclaim it. Not for herself, but for everyone who had ever been called replaceable. Everyone who had been passed over, looked through, laughed at. Everyone who had given their labor without ever being seen. The woman who once wiped dust from the glass walls was about to make them transparent. And the board had no idea she was already holding the light. Clara Jennings moved like clockwork. To anyone observing from the outside, she was predictable, precise. But beneath that quiet rhythm was a storm-gathering weight, built on truths that could no longer stay hidden. The Jennings report was complete, but Clara knew a document, no matter how damning, was only a tool. What mattered now was strategy, timing, delivery. She had the truth. But the truth without a plan was a whisper in a windstorm. Every day, as she pushed her cleaning cart through the gleaming corridors of Delacroix Holdings, Clara reviewed the next phase of her mission. She had the evidence, the testimonies, the forensic audits. What she needed now was leverage. Real-world, boardroom-level traction. Clara had never played politics. She had never worn a suit or delivered a pitch with a PowerPoint presentation. But she understood something deeper. People. Patterns. The invisible mechanics that moved an organization like Delacroix. And she knew that fear alone couldn't change systems. If she wanted real transformation, not just retribution, she had to be as methodical in her uprising as the company had been in suppressing its own people. Her first move was subtle. She reasserted her voting rights. Quietly, through her attorney, she rescinded the proxy that Leonard Bishop's office had used for years. It was a single document, notarized and delivered by hand. No press release, no announcement, just a legal reality that would change everything. She now had the sole authority to represent the largest block of shares at Delacroix Holdings. But power means little without presence. So she requested to attend the upcoming annual shareholder meeting, not as staff, not as an observer, but as the majority stakeholder. Legally, they couldn't refuse. Privately, they didn't take it seriously. Clara's name wasn't on any internal email threads. No one in the upper levels of the executive suite was warned. To them, it was business as usual. Another annual review, another self-congratulatory event, another morning of Leonard Bishop standing at a podium, spinning numbers into applause. Let them stay blind, she thought. But Clara didn't want to walk into that room alone. So she began to build a quiet coalition. She called Camille, her niece, and asked her to prepare a financial summary that distilled the Jennings report into 5 clear bullet points, each one tied to an ethical breach and its measurable cost. Camille delivered the summary within a week, each page color-coded, clear, irrefutable. Then Clara met again with Evelyn, the former HR manager who had once been forced out for refusing to cover up a harassment claim. Evelyn had kept detailed notes and corroborating statements. More importantly, she still had the respect of many employees, those who remembered what a fair workplace once looked like. Evelyn agreed to speak if needed, but more than that, she offered something Clara hadn't expected: perspective. "This isn't just about firing Leonard," Evelyn said, her voice low but urgent. "You're about to tear down a wall they spent 20 years building. Have you thought about what happens next?" Clara had. Every night she stared at the ceiling and thought about it. What if they laughed at her? What if they fought her with lawyers, or PR spin, or worse, apathy? What if the truth wasn't enough? But she had lived too long in silence to return to it now. Still, she prepared. Not just for confrontation, but for leadership. She started reaching out to the people at the heart of the company. Not executives, not managers, but those in payroll, maintenance, customer service. She didn't ask them to speak out. She didn't put anyone in danger. She simply asked, "If things could change here, what would you want to see?" Some cried. Some didn't trust her at first. But slowly, the answers came. "I want to stop feeling like a ghost. I want to work without fear. I just want someone to notice when I do my job well." Clara wrote everything down. She began sketching a new version of Delacroix, one rooted not in glossy marketing or inflated valuations, but in humanity. Her vision wasn't radical. It was restorative: transparent hiring, equitable pay structures, third-party accountability, mental health days, real grievance processes, profit sharing for long-tenured staff, a culture built on recognition, not fear. It sounded utopian, until you remembered it used to be the standard before ambition curdled into arrogance. The final piece was timing. The annual meeting was scheduled for the last Friday of the quarter, held in the high-rise's executive floor, in a room that overlooked the skyline Clara had stared at for 17 years. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. She chose not to make a scene in advance. No leaks, no press, no preamble. Let them walk into the meeting as they always had, confident, dismissive, unbothered. She wanted them to be caught off guard. Not for revenge, but because it was the only way to make them see her. Really see her. In the days leading up to the meeting, Clara rehearsed her speech in front of a mirror, so many times she could deliver it without blinking. She wore her grandmother's gold pin, a small, delicate flame, on the lapel of the navy blazer she bought second-hand for the occasion. On the morning of the meeting, she woke up before dawn, made tea, and sat in silence. She wasn't nervous, she wasn't angry, she was ready. At 8:15 a.m., Clara Jennings stepped onto the elevator, not with a mop, but with a briefcase. She passed co-workers who didn't recognize her in a blazer. She stepped into the boardroom, not as a cleaner but as a catalyst. She took her seat at the table she had once wiped down after others had eaten, and she waited, not for permission, but for the moment she had built, quietly, patiently, powerfully. They had always believed she was part of the background. They were about to learn that the background had been watching, and now it was stepping into the light. The room was all glass and steel, sterile in its elegance, suspended on the 32nd floor of the Delacroix Tower. The morning sun filtered through the wide windows, casting a cold glow across the boardroom table. Around it sat 12 men and women dressed in sharp suits, sipping coffee from porcelain cups, their voices low and confident. The hum of pre-meeting chatter filled the space with the kind of entitlement that comes not from intelligence, but from immunity. Leonard Bishop arrived precisely at 8:57 a.m., flanked by his executive assistant and 2 legal advisors. He didn't knock, he never did. He strolled in like he owned the hour, the view, and the air itself. When he took his seat at the head of the table, the conversation quieted, but not out of respect. It was instinctual, conditioned, like water responding to gravity. Clara Jennings sat 3 seats down, her hands folded over a slim manila folder. No one had acknowledged her yet. Not really. A few polite nods, the kind that come from faces vaguely familiar but impossible to place. No one recognized her as the woman who had quietly vacuumed under this very table a year ago, nor the woman who had once waited in the hallway while they laughed about firing half of facilities. Leonard glanced toward her once, gave a perfunctory smile, and returned to his phone. She didn't take it personally. She expected it. What she didn't expect was how calm she felt. At 9:02, The meeting officially began. An assistant read the agenda. Financial updates, investment projections, strategic initiatives. It was routine, rehearsed, a corporate performance everyone knew by heart. Until Clara stood. It was so simple, just a motion of her hands against the edge of the table, pushing herself to her feet. But it shifted the room. The assistant paused mid-sentence. A few board members turned, puzzled. "I'd like to request the floor," Clara said. Her voice was quiet, but clear, polished like stone smoothed by decades of weather. Leonard didn't look up immediately. When he did, his expression wavered. Just for a second. "I'm sorry. Do we have a guest presentation?" he asked, glancing at the board chair. The chair, an older man named Simmons, who had known Martin Jennings in the early years, sat straighter. His eyes narrowed. Clara met his gaze and gave a small nod. "I'm not a guest," she replied. "I'm Clara Jennings, majority shareholder." The silence that followed was not stunned. It was stunned into disbelief, as if her words couldn't quite find purchase in the ears that had grown so used to dismissing her. Leonard scoffed. "Majority shareholder? You must be mistaken. That—" "I am not mistaken," Clara said, unfolding the manila folder with practiced precision. "My late husband, Martin Jennings, invested in this company when it was little more than borrowed space and borrowed time. Upon his passing, his stake transferred to me. I have since retained full rights, quietly, legally, and without delegation. As of today, I hold 47% of this company." She handed the folder to Simmons, who opened it and scanned the notarized documents inside. His face shifted from skepticism to recognition, to something close to awe. Leonard's voice rose, brittle now. "This is ridiculous. You're the janitor." Clara turned her gaze to him, steady, unreadable. "And for 17 years, that's what you let me be." While I watched. Gasps were audible now. The assistant set her notepad down. A younger board member leaned forward, scanning the documents that were now circulating like electricity. Clara didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "I'm here today not just as a shareholder, but as a witness," she said. "I've spent years documenting the decay of this company's culture. The quiet firings, the buried complaints, the financial sleight of hand disguised as strategy. I've spoken to the employees you never knew by name, listened to their stories, and compiled the facts. I bring you the Jennings report." She held up a second folder, heavier than the first, and placed it on the center of the table. Leonard laughed, the sound forced and thin. "You think you can walk in here with a few allegations and undo years of work?" Clara's response was a pause. Then, "I'm not undoing your work. I'm revealing it." Leonard stood now, his voice rising. "You don't know how to run a company." "I never claimed I did," Clara said. "But I know how to protect people. I know how to listen. I know how to lead with integrity. And I know when something needs to end." She turned to the board, her eyes sweeping over the faces that had once looked through her. "I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in Leonard Bishop, effective immediately." The room snapped to life, voices overlapping, papers shifting. Some board members looked panicked, others looked relieved. Leonard pounded the table. "You can't do this. This is a setup. This is a disgrace." Simmons raised a hand. "Mr. Bishop, sit down." Leonard froze. Simmons turned to Clara. "You have the votes?" Clara nodded. "I have the support of 2 other stakeholders. Combined, we represent 53%. It was done before Leonard even sat down. The vote passed in 12 minutes. 12 minutes to dismantle what had taken him 20 years to build on fear and bluster. When Leonard was escorted from the room, his eyes found Clara's one last time, but he didn't see rage. He didn't see triumph. He saw peace. Not the peace of someone who had won, but of someone who had finally stopped carrying something heavy. The room fell into silence. And in that silence, Clara stood tall. Not with a badge, not with a crown, but with something rarer. Proof that dignity, when guarded patiently and released at the right moment, can bring down giants. The woman they thought had no voice had just rewritten the company's story. Not with fury, but with fact. By Monday morning, the news had spread like wildfire through every floor of Delacroix Holdings. Clara Jennings, the woman they had walked past 1,000 times without acknowledgement, the woman whose name had never appeared in meeting minutes or leadership reports, was now at the helm of the company's future. Some employees blinked at the email announcing the CEO's removal, half convinced it was a hoax. Others whispered in elevators, unsure of how to interpret the moment. But for the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones who had held their heads down for far too long, something in the building had shifted. They felt it in the air, in the way their footsteps echoed just a little louder, in the way the receptionist looked them in the eye for the first time in years. Clara didn't take a victory lap. She didn't move into a top-floor office or redecorate the CEO's suite. In fact, she asked for the executive suite to be converted into an open mentorship space, walls replaced by glass, doors always open, a symbol of the new direction she envisioned. Her first act wasn't bold. It was intentional. She gathered every member of the facilities team, the custodians, janitors, maintenance workers, and part-time staff, and invited them into the same boardroom where she had once stood alone. There were no photographers, no press, just coffee, chairs, and one woman standing among her own. She didn't deliver a speech. She told a story, her story. And when she was done, she looked every single one of them in the eye and said, "You were never invisible." They just refused to look. From that day forward, Clara insisted that every department, regardless of title or prestige, had a voice in monthly planning meetings. She created what she called the Ground Floor Initiative, a leadership development program specifically for entry-level employees who showed integrity and courage, not just degrees or connections. It wasn't charity. It was investment. Clara believed that brilliance didn't belong to the boardroom. It belonged wherever people were given space to grow. She also restructured the HR department, bringing in external watchdogs to investigate long-standing complaints and ensure transparency moving forward. Raises were issued retroactively for those whose compensation had stagnated while executive bonuses soared. Clara didn't see it as generosity. She saw it as overdue justice. She turned the company cafeteria into a place where employees from all levels could sit side by side. No more reserved tables, no more silent hierarchies. And slowly, people started talking to each other again. Not because they were told to, but because they felt safe enough to try. One afternoon, a young assistant approached her in the hallway. Clara remembered him, the same young man who had spilled coffee outside Leonard Bishop's office a year earlier and had been humiliated for it. "Ms. Jennings," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say thank you for not forgetting us." Clara smiled. "It's not that I didn't forget you," she replied. "It's that I always knew you mattered." Outside the Delacroix building, reporters had started to circle. News of the CEO's removal and the rise of the cleaning lady-turned-corporate force was already being shared across headlines. Clara refused every interview. She didn't want her story twisted into a viral soundbite. This wasn't a spectacle. It was a restoration. But within the building, something far more powerful was happening. People were remembering how to care again. At a quarterly town hall meeting, Clara stood in front of a packed auditorium. Interns, analysts, assistants, engineers, janitors, and yes, executives, all in the same room. She spoke plainly. She didn't dazzle them with charts or spin them with corporate slogans. She just told them what Delacroix was going to become. "We are not going to be a company that survives on silence anymore," she said. "We are not going to grow at the expense of our people. We are going to succeed because of our people." The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous. And in the weeks that followed, Clara received letters, handwritten notes left on her desk, emails from departments she hadn't visited yet, messages from former employees who said they finally believed in the company again. She read every one. One message came from a woman who had resigned 5 years earlier after reporting misconduct and being ignored. The message was just one line. "I wish someone like you had been there when I needed to stay." That night, Clara sat at her kitchen table, alone, reading and rereading that line. She thought of Martin, of his quiet belief in a better kind of company. She thought of all the nights she spent wondering if she was doing the right thing by staying. And now she knew. She hadn't just stayed for herself. She had stayed for what could come after her. Clara never pretended to have all the answers. But she had lived through the questions. She had walked the halls as the lowest paid worker and returned as the most powerful voice. And still, she moved through the building with humility, with memory, because she knew what it was like to be overlooked, and she vowed never to let anyone feel that way again. Delacroix Holdings didn't become perfect overnight. Mistakes still happened. Egos still flared. But now, people listened. Now accountability wasn't a threat, it was a promise. And Clara Jennings? She didn't see herself as a hero. She saw herself as a mirror, one that forced people to look at what they had become and decide who they wanted to be. In time, they would look back at the day she stood in the boardroom and changed everything. Not as a spectacle, but as a beginning. The day the cleaning lady took the floor and gave it back to everyone. Clara Jennings began her journey in the shadows of a glass tower, a figure most people never saw, a name they never learned. For nearly 2 decades, she quietly pushed a cleaning cart through the same hallways that echoed with deals, decisions, and dismissals. To the corporate elite, she was just the cleaning lady. But behind that unassuming role was a woman with a mind like a ledger and a heart like a compass, someone who never stopped observing, never stopped believing that integrity had a place in even the most cutthroat corners of business. Her transformation didn't happen overnight. It was shaped through years of quiet resilience, long hours spent listening to voices that assumed she wasn't listening, and late nights documenting every injustice she witnessed. And when the time came, Clara didn't storm into the boardroom in anger. She walked in with proof, with purpose, with the power they never thought she possessed. By revealing herself as the majority shareholder, Clara flipped the script on an entire institution. She not only removed a corrupt CEO, she dismantled a culture of fear, replaced silence with dignity, and rebuilt trust brick by brick from the ground up. More than that, she gave voice to the invisible, restored humanity to the workplace, and showed that leadership is not measured by volume or visibility, but by the courage to act when it matters most. Clara's story isn't just about corporate redemption. It's about the power of being underestimated. It's about the people society labels as small, background, or irrelevant. And how often, those are the very people holding the whole structure together. Clara teaches us that sometimes, the strongest leadership is the one that listens the longest. That real change comes not from ego, but from empathy. And that when someone stands up for what's right, no matter how quietly, they can move mountains. So what can we take from her journey? First, never assume someone's worth based on their title, attire, or role. Every person you pass has a story, a strength, and a voice, whether or not they're using it yet. Second, don't wait for permission to become who you are meant to be. Clara didn't wait for a seat at the table. She claimed her place with quiet conviction and undeniable truth. And lastly, understand that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it arrives in the form of a woman who simply refuses to be unseen any longer. If Clara Jennings's story inspired you, reminded you of your own worth, or made you look at the people around you differently, don't let it end here. Subscribe to this channel and join us in sharing more powerful human-centered stories that prove one simple truth. Greatness often comes from the most unexpected places, and the people we overlook today may be the ones who lead us tomorrow.